Abarera, Lagos, Ram, Ori, Banish, C10, Demonio, Dinaja, 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 Abarera, Lagos, Ram, Ori, Banish.
All right, welcome, everybody, to the inaugural episode of Adversary of My Adversary. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of everything, the little one wants to say hi and run. They can see you now, by the way. Okay, so I guess he's just going to stay there and bob up and down. I guess that's what he's going to do. So, yeah. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Adversary of My Adversary. Do you want to make this logo a little bit smaller? They're saying hello. Let's see, we're on this one, yeah. So I just need to make this logo just a little bit smaller because that logo is way too big. There we go. All right, so kind of what we're... Okay, hold on a second, chat, because I can't focus with him bobbing back and forth. Hold on a second. It's just very, very hard to focus with him bobbing up and down in the background. So, what's the premise of the show? So, one of the biggest kind of points that I really want this show to focus on is being a couple in the occult and how that dynamic works, right? How the dynamic, I do have a son who was like that at his age. Kid's gonna be a kid, man. So we have a lengthy kind of map for how we're going to go through this. And so for today, what we're going to be kind of starting with is kind of our introduction to the left-hand path as a couple. We're going to be talking about what the left-hand path is and how does it differ from other spiritual paths, again in the context of being a couple, how practicing LHP as a couple can strengthen the relationship, and setting shared goals and intentions on the path. So that's kind of like what the focus of today is going to be. So I think you guys have a good understanding of like what our viewpoint on LHP is. We've talked about it quite a bit, especially over the last, week or so, right? So we've done a lot of kind of discussion on that. But what we haven't talked about is specifically LHP as a couple, because, well, as we've kind of beaten the dead horse about LHP, it's an individual path, right? It's, self-deification, the immortality of self. So how can that apply to a relationship? We're going to pick your brain first. So how do you think the left-hand path helps us and could help relationships, even though it is an individualistic path?
There's definitely been times so far for the both of us, I think, where we've prompted each other in ways to take personal responsibility and reminding each other of the values and the goals when it comes to this path, because that can sometimes be difficult to hold in your vision when faced with certain situations. So I think it's definitely massive when it comes to like a support thing, in terms of like the way in which we're able to support each other. And I just completely lost my train of thought.
I mean, it's...
Need nicotine, that's why.
Right, yeah. So I definitely do think that working on the left-hand path and having an understanding of oneself and kind of taking responsibility for one's own actions can allow you to be put into a position where when you notice that your partner is not, like, they start to kind of blame external things for stuff that's happening instead of looking at what it is that they can do to fix things. It puts you in a position where you can call that out, right? Like, instead of enabling a behavior and saying, yeah, it's the rest of the world's fault, you can turn it into, what can we do, right? What can you do and what can we do? And it doesn't always have to be just like what can you do by yourself, but what can we do together to kind of make this, make this better, make this process easier for whatever the situation is. Without getting into specifics, I mean, there's a lot of difficulty that, we've been dealing with here in our first week, physically together. And, it has been a thing where, both of us have, we've needed to support each other. Even though most of it's my shit, she's supported me in certain ways and I've had to support her in certain ways, because obviously it inevitably affects her. And I definitely think that the left-hand path as a philosophy, really does help with that. I think kind of like one of the big things that a lot of podcasts of this nature kind of talk about is, bringing God into a relationship, right? That, having a relationship work You need God in the relationship. And in this case, when we talk about the LHP, the God that you're bringing into your relationship is yourself, right? And the understanding that you're responsible for your own actions. I think that on a lot of levels, and on a relationship level, I think that is a really important thing to understand that, you're responsible for, if you say something stupid and it upsets your partner, like you're responsible for that, right? It's not to say, that there's some external force or that they did something that caused you to act that way. You made a decision to say something, right? Or to do something that affected the other person negatively. And I think that, in the LHP, I think that, it's important to understand and take responsibility for those actions. And I think that when you immediately take responsibility for an action, you're already on the right path of, correcting that and making sure that it doesn't happen again. Because you're aware that you're the one that's responsible for the words that come out of your mouth or, what you physically do. So I'm going to be honest. I think being a couple, in the LHP, I think we've got a leg up on most of the Christians, because most of them, when they want to fix something, they need to go to church and pray about it. When we want to fix something, we're like, okay, what can I do right now in this moment, to make this better, and be a better person, right? And I think that, there's also there's another side to it as well, that, we don't lose our individuality. I think one of the biggest problems in most relationships of what happens is so I look at a relationship as like there's a 3-tier or 3-prong aspect to a relationship, right? There's you, there's the person you're with, and then you guys as a unit, right? So there's 3 different aspects that need to be catered to. And one of the reasons why many relationships fail is because someone in the relationship, at some point starts living for the other person and forgets who they are as an individual and the things that they need to be doing for themselves, right? And it causes kind of a bit of a conflict inside of the relationship. And I think in, Left-Hand Path, we don't lose, that understanding that I'm me, she's her, and we are us together. And those 3 aspects of things, live and coexist together, right? And this isn't to say, I think here's like the big thing that like a lot of people might misconstrue thinking of that, right? It's not to say that there isn't monogamy, right? We are completely monogamous, right? There is no third wheel. There is no, other parties involved, that isn't even an entertained idea, right? Behemoth-X, welcome. And happy Halloween. So we're completely monogamous. There is no polyamory at play or anything like that. Both of us actually rather find that quite disgusting. And furthermore, beyond that, we both agree with the ideology and the direction of marriage, children, and a nuclear family, right? Which most people would look at as very conservative ideas, right? Especially being occultists. But I don't think that, belief in Satan inherently means that you need to fuck everything that moves. I don't think that that's what that means. I think that, belief in Satan and belief in, these types of entities, what it more lends itself to, I think, is understanding what is right for you, right? And respecting what you want and not settling outside of the spectrum of what it is that you want in a relationship, what it is that you want out of another human being, how you believe that you deserve to be treated, and, the amount of compatibility that you have with someone else, right? I think that is, a big thing. I mean, what are your thoughts on all of that?
I was literally just thinking, it feels like there's a gap in the market for a book for occult couples, LHP couples. I think the way we would probably write it would probably piss off a lot of people.
Probably.
And we'd probably get called various names that exist under the sun. But no, it's definitely something that's not really spoken about. And I think the autonomy is such an important aspect. Like, for example, I had a little thing that I needed to do earlier, just, my monthly kind of new moon routine. And Atius said to me, oh yeah, you can, do what you want, like, with the space, with the altar. And I was like, no, I can't, I'm not violating your space, but it feels like I am. I really have to, if I'm using another person's space, I have to really respect it. So, even in terms of things like not leaving candles burning or making sure that, like, if there's loads of, like, smoke, that it's not smoking out the entire place, and picking things up, touching things, and all of that, like. And I came back out, and he said to me, oh, how did you find using everything? I was like, I didn't. I didn't. And he was like, I said you could. I was like, well, I can't. So, that's the thing. I think that there is definitely, like, a separation when it comes to our practices. And I think that's a very necessary thing in order to feel like our practices still belong to us. Doesn't mean to say that we can't maybe offer a bit of guidance if it's asked for, if it's warranted. But our path is our path, and we don't want to take anything away from each other.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely agree with that. I mean, it's, so if you guys are wondering what Ian's doing, he's chasing after the cat. So the cat went outside on the balcony, kind of started freaking out. I was like, the cat. And it's like, trust me, the cat's not going anywhere. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's kind of like a level of kind of like, just, you can be told that you can use something, you can be told that you can do something, and, if you still don't feel right in it, I mean, it's good to be able to make that choice, right? It's good to be able to kind of look at a situation and say, okay, thank you for, opening this up to me, but, I'm still going to have to pass, right? And I think that that's kind of like a big point, in this, is being able to make the other person feel comfortable, but at the same time, if what makes them comfortable is the opposite, like, don't take it personally, and communication, like, damn, like, communication's like a huge thing, right? Like, I've seen like countless amounts of like Christian couples and things like that for some reason, like, I mean, they like to talk about communication, but they just don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to talk to each other, And one thing I've realized is, being able to kind of like understand, like, your own head and where your own head is at. Like, I'm an overthinker. Like, I overthink a lot on like a bunch of shit. And being able to have that conversation, be able to say, hey, I know this is bullshit. I know that, this is my brain overthinking things. But, I really like to talk about this and not be attacked for it, right? Like, that's a huge thing. Yeah, and Curse, that's another thing, boundaries, right? Boundaries are extremely important, right? What's okay, what's not okay. Setting those boundaries, like what you're comfortable with, and, boundaries, I think it's very important to look at boundaries like a line in the sand. It's like, this is a limit, that can't be crossed, that can't be, you can't go past this, right? This thing. And, it's one of those things that, and the left-hand path, like we have I do firmly believe that we have a better understanding of like what our own limits are and what we're willing to accept and what we're not willing to accept, and being able to openly talk about it.
Yeah, I feel like for me, what the left-hand path has taught me when it comes to relationships is what I will tolerate and what I won't. And also being able to respect myself enough to choose someone that respects me. I think when it comes to boundaries, we discussed that quite early on, which was good because it, like, I mean, I can speak for myself, but nothing has happened where I felt like that my boundaries have been violated because I feel like we've spoken about it so early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. I keep putting it really far away from you. You know, yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, same thing here. I think, you know, when you're getting into something, I think one of the things a lot of people miss, like when you kind of start talking to somebody in a more intimate manner, people want to try to keep it fun, right? They want to keep it lighthearted. And, you know, I firmly believe that, like, at the end of the day, like, you know, those serious conversations that people wait until like after they're married or something like that, they wait to have the serious conversations then. And it's like, that's definitely not when you should be having those serious conversations. You should be having the serious conversations like right at the very beginning. You know, like, talk about the shit that you don't want to talk about at the beginning and get it out of the way, because if you realize that you're compatible with somebody after having those difficult conversations, you've got an entire lifetime in front of you to make memories and enjoy your time together, you know. But if you wait until, you know, after, you know, you make a huge decision in your life, like, you know, getting married or having kids, you know, you now you're in a point where it's like, well, wait a minute, that you're not the person I thought you were. You know, like, if this is how you feel about things, like, I mean, I wasn't aware of this. And now you're stuck in a situation where you're with somebody that you don't really know because you didn't have those difficult conversations at the beginning, you know?
Yeah. And I feel like for both of us, with our level of past experiences, it was really necessary to get to know each other on that level before we could fully trust. Mm-hmm. And I had a really good talking point, and it's gone. I can't believe I'm still struggling with this level of tiredness and stuff like that after a week of being here. Like, surely I would have adjusted by now. Well, that was the thing. That was it. The left-hand path and its awareness of the shadow. There's a reason why people love, well, I'm not going to speak to everyone, but there's a reason there's a level of peace when it comes to being single, and that you don't get that same peace when you're in a relationship. It's because when you're on your own, you're not faced with your shadow as much. It's because when you are with someone intimately, things are brought out in you. Things that you perhaps didn't think affected you anymore. If you're with another person, I hate the word, but, you know, you trigger each other. Not even meaning to. It can be as simple as, oh, they looked at me a bit weird. I wonder what's wrong. I wonder what I've done. And, you know, it can start bringing up all these fears and insecurities. And, you know, that's the stuff that I feel like when it comes to left-hand path, instead of going, you know, running away from it and going, oh, I can't be in a relationship, I'm too broken, or, oh, this other person is making me feel like this. It's showing you what you need to work on, what you need to do your shadow work around. So yeah, I think that's a massive thing as well.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I mean that like I would even push that over like into lines like even like some friendships, like really good friendships will do that to you. You know, like I am one of those people that I firmly believe that if somebody actually cares about you, they're going to call you out on your shit. You know, like, I mean, they'll put up with it to a certain point, but then there's going to become a point where it's going to be like, hey, you're doing that fucking thing again. Like, get your shit straight. And it's beneficial. I mean, maybe not in that exact wording, because it kind of feels like an attack, but to something to that effect, right? Is being able to have that communication. And I mean, that's also another big thing, that like trying to be, aware of what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it, right? So like when I'm overthinking and stuff like that, and like I want to talk about it, I am very cautious about the way that I say things, because I know that I can unintentionally come across accusatory, right? And so it's extremely important to understand, how it is you normally do something, and to actively make an attempt to not come across that way. At least I'll speak for myself in that particular type of situation, is that, I will, be overthinking about something, and because I want to talk about it and get it out in the open so it'll dissipate, there's a level of, accusation in my mind. And you need to be very aware not to let that part of things come across, because it's never ever just what you say, it's how you say it, right? Like how you say things is extremely important. And again, left-hand path, in my opinion, is so crucial in that, because I'm responsible for how I say things, right? I mean, I can come across and say, hey, I'm having these thoughts, and I know that there's nothing behind them, but I still want to talk about them. Or you can come across and say, what took you so long? Why didn't you answer my messages? Why, who were you with? Like, what was so important that, you couldn't answer me? You couldn't pay attention to me? Why? Those are bad things to say. Those are things that you should never say to somebody that, you're in a relationship with, right? Especially if it's all in your head, right? Like, most people as overthinkers, we like to think that, most of the time when we overthink something, we're right about it. That's just not true. Like, I mean, I've seen memes like that on like Instagram and stuff like that. It's like, oh yeah, the problem with overthinking is most of the time you're right. And I think that's a very toxic position to be in, right? To sit there and think that just because you're overthinking about something, or because you're connecting dots that don't necessarily connect, to think that you're right about something just because you're thinking it, and then attacking, the person that, you care about, because you're worried that they were doing something that they probably weren't doing, right? Without any tangible proof of anything. So being aware of yourself and how you say things and how you come across is extremely important. And I think that that's important, not even just like in a cult relationship, just in any fucking relationship, like, please, like, pay attention to how you say things, not just what you're saying, but how you say it, right? Because that can dictate the difference between having a conversation that irons everything out and being able to watch a movie at night together, to somebody sleeping on the couch or going to get a hotel room, right? Because those types of arguments, as overthinkers, like we always want to kind of prove a point, right? Like we always want to, for the other person to see things from our perspective, or how our brain was connecting the dots. But the problem with that is, chances are we're connecting the dots incorrectly. And so the other person's not going to be able to see it the way we're seeing it, because we're seeing it incorrectly. And so being able to have a conversation about it, a level-headed, calm, rational conversation about what's going on in someone's head in the relationship, is extremely important. Because if the person knows that you're not coming from an accusatory place, and you're like, hey, I've been thinking this way, the last couple hours, waiting for you to come home or whatever. You can sit down and say, oh, okay. Well, let's talk about it. Like, well, what made you think this? What made you feel this way? What can I do to make this better? Or like, what can we do to make this better, to make this easier for you, right? If this comes and happens again, right? And have a productive conversation, right? Like, I think that's something that's missed in so many relationships, is the productivity aspect of the conversation. Like, you don't have a conversation just to have a conversation. You have a conversation to, find a solution to a problem, right? There's a problem. There's something happening. So a solution needs to be found, even if the solution is just listening, and then providing reassurances. There's nothing wrong with providing somebody reassurances, but like, there's a lot of people out there who jump out there and say, well, this person's clingy, this person's this person's that. I think we all need reassurances. Like, I think we all look for reassurances in our own way. And, if you're not able to provide that to your partner, then I think you should probably have a serious conversation with yourself about whether or not you're with the right person.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it as well, like having healthy communication and being able to talk things through, has a lot to do with reaction versus response. Am I responding or am I reacting? Having the ability to regulate that enough so that you are not causing harm to the other person or yourself. Nobody's perfect, and we can't. I think expectations are an important thing as well, because when someone gets into a relationship, there's a tendency to put someone on a pedestal. And when it comes to relationships that are quite volatile, it can flip. So they're either on this pedestal and they're amazing and they're godlike, or they are the fucking villain. And a relationship can't function like that. You have to be able to honor the other person's humanity, and that we are gonna fuck up. Hopefully not detrimentally, but, and fucking up, I don't mean, oh, I accidentally cheated on you, sorry. I mean, like, saying things or doing something where perhaps it was a bit inconsiderate and the person just wasn't thinking. And I feel like, that ties into Left-Hand Path as well, being responsible for your emotional reactions. Mm-hmm. There's this sort of narrative that I see a lot when it comes to a particular mental illness, where it's like, oh, I can't help the way I am. I have this, I have this mental illness. It makes me, do and say and all this like crazy shit. And as someone who has had a diagnosis of this, I can say it's simply not true. It's simply not true. No matter, unless you are literally psychotic, you can control your responses. It can take some work, but you can absolutely do it. And I do feel like that is some kind of like get out of jail free card that people like to wave around, just like, oh, it's not my fault, I'm like this, like I was traumatized. We've all got some fucking level of trauma which which affects us. And that's not me victim blaming or trying to minimize what anyone has been through. It's the truth. We can't let what has happened to us in the past turn us into people that can't take responsibility for anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. So another thing that I kind of want to throw out there, changing up the subject here a little bit, is another thing that I think would be interesting for this podcast would be, like, if there's anyone out there that like has any questions or scenarios that they've been through and would like us to kind of talk about it, then I think, feel free to email myself or Dyra directly with your questions and stuff like that. And
it can be agony aunts.
So
agony occultists.
Right, so we can kind of talk about that, like, talk about your guys' scenarios and give our point of view and things like that. I'm just going to be completely honest, like we will be brutally honest, with our opinions. We're not going to sugarcoat anything, but if that's what you guys are looking for, if you're curious what our thoughts are on certain things, then I would be more than happy to provide it. I have a cat trying to get my attention and a 10-year-old. So, double duty tonight. But
Me.
yeah, and you. And you. But yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to just like the relationship aspect of things a lot, like you definitely, left-hand path definitely plays a role. But I think like the biggest part of it is just trying to be a decent human being, like regardless of what your path is, like you don't need to be Christian to have a fulfilling relationship. You don't need to be Satanist to have a fulfilling relationship. You don't need to be atheist to have a fulfilling relationship. You just need to be a decent human being to have a fulfilling relationship. Slim Lewis, happy Halloween from Memphis. Rock on.
We were talking about Tennessee last night, weren't we?
Yes, we were. She was going down each state alphabetically in the United States, whether or not I would want to visit it. And Tennessee was definitely on my yes list because, hell, fucking Nashville's fucking music city of the world right there. So it's hard for you to make friends. Well, I mean, I think, so here's the thing, like, I mean, when it comes to getting into a relationship or friendships, like, I honestly believe keep your circle small, right? Like, just be you. Like, who you are today, like, Curse, I happen to know you're fairly young. Not going to mention ages or anything like that, but I know that you're on the younger side of things. And who you are today is not who you're going to be in the next 5 years. And that's not, like, a bad thing. Like, you might not want to change who you are. You might like who you are, but you're going to evolve. You're going to grow. And with the people that you have in your circle today, they might not fit in your life 5-10 years from now. And that's perfectly normal, but they served their purpose and you served a purpose in their lives, for the time being that you were there, right? It just kind of is what it is. I think that's kind of like the biggest difference between friendships and relationship, right? Is like friendships, you build a friendship with the expectation that there's a potentiality that somewhere down the line that you're going to grow apart and start your own lives and just no longer communicate. When you go into a relationship with someone, you're saying, I want to grow with you, right? Like, I want to grow in the same direction that you're growing, right? Like, we're still going to change. We're still going to kind of like, advance and move forward and things like that, with who we are as people, over the years because of experiences and ideas and opinions and information that we gather along the way. But in a relationship, there's that defining difference, right? Is that the entire goal is to say, all right, I want to grow with this person, right? And I think that a lot of people use the terms like kind of growing apart and growing together, to say that if you grow apart, it's like where the relationship kind of starts to end. And I think like the important aspect to remember inside of a relationship is that there is going to be aspects that are going to grow apart. There should be. There should be differences that are maintained. The differences make things interesting. The similarities make things compatible. And, it's just kind of like dictating, are the level of differences that we have acceptable differences, or, are these deal breakers, right? And again, that's where those difficult conversations in the beginning come in, right? So you get all of that shit out of the way. So that way, once those conversations are done, I can't say that they're done. You always end up having a difficult conversation somewhere down the line. Something like, there's so many to have, like, maybe we should come up with like a list. I can kind of like put it up on a website or something, like, here's the list of difficult conversations I have.
We do. I sent you some prompts earlier, didn't I?
Yeah,
on
you
TikTok
did.
of like difficult conversations.
Yeah, that was interesting. I've seen that guy before. Yeah. He's very passionate.
Yeah.
So, you know, but yeah, I think that like as long as you have those difficult conversations in the beginning, you know, you'll know inside of like a couple of weeks, honestly, like whether or not you're truly compatible with somebody. You know, as long as you're having the right kinds of conversations. If you're avoiding those conversations because you're afraid of what you're going to find, because you want to be with somebody because of, you know, some more mundane level of attraction, then, you know, you're kind of, you're barking up the wrong tree, and like you're probably going to end up, you know, in a dumpster fire. You know, sometimes it works out, like, right? Sometimes, like, you know, you get that 50-50 and you're like, hey, you know what, everything worked out great. But, you know, most of the time you're looking at a dumpster fire. Why? Because when two people are afraid to have those difficult conversations, they're afraid of those answers, that probably means there's something inside of you that you might want to work on. You know, that you don't want to be called out, because that's what these difficult conversations do. When you have these difficult conversations, it's not calling out the other person about how they do things. It forces you to look at how you do things. You know?
I think to end this episode, we should summarize how we came to be.
Summarize how we came to be. How would we summarize that?
Well, obviously you had me on Apocrypha. That was the first time.
Yeah, so we met for the first time I met her was on Apocrypha. That was because of a video that she did about
After School Satan Club.
yeah, which was reflected a lot of my ideas on TST and things like that. And so that's kind of like what sparked the interest right there, is like, you know, her thought patterns, like seeing somebody that openly disagreed with TST, which is, you know, not a popular opinion to have. Then from there, kind of wanted to continue communication. I think I had to, did we have you on one more time after that?
Yeah, you had me on once more after that.
Okay.
And then you wanted to make me a regular.
Yeah. Yeah. And then kind of fished kind of like the idea of witch skills, which was, you know, to kind of build a school together and stuff like that, because she had mentioned that she had a falling out with the previous person that she was working with. I don't want to get into too grave in detail of that. And kind of built off of that. Like it was like Wednesday meetings, and then we kind of realized that, you know, we were having conversations that had nothing to do with work. And then like the last 10 minutes, like, oh yeah, we still got to talk about work. And, you know, it just kind of went from there. You know, the first attempt that was made was like a no. I was completely shot down. And then, you know, from there, you know, it just kind of, we just kind of kept talking, and, you know, eventually, you know, it moved.
Was a yes.
Yeah, eventually it moved into being, yeah, okay, this works, right? You know, this is something that we can talk about. And it just kind of went from there. And it's going strong, and there's a lot of plans for the future and things like that, and plans that we're both very excited about. That would be my summary of how we came to be. I don't want to give too many details. So, you know, power and secrets and all.
Yeah.
So, anything you want to add to it?
I mean, I think you summarized it pretty well. I think it was interesting to... Where's Mystic? We're not polyamorous. Mystic is not...
Yeah, right. Mystic isn't here. So for those that are unaware, so this is not Apocrypha. This is Adversary of my Adversary. So this is a completely separate show. So normally we're going to be having the show on Fridays. around the same time, but because it's Halloween, we figured, well, why not have the first inaugural episode on Halloween? So Saturday we'll still be doing Apocrypha with Mystic. It'll be the three of us, so you'll have the three of us there. And then Sunday will be Satan and Coffee, right? As it were. So tomorrow, no show tomorrow. But there will definitely be, a show on, you think Mystic is cool? Yeah, Mystic is very cool. We love Mystic, right? He's a very cool guy. So you'll see him on Saturday. We didn't have him last Saturday because he was doing something else. But I do believe we have him back this Saturday. So it'll be the three of us on Apocrypha on Saturday night.
Mystic third wheeling.
Yeah. So definitely be good. But I think for this evening, guys, I think that's going to be it. Thank you all for attending the inaugural episode of Adversary of My Adversary. Hoping for many, many more of these. We have a really long episode list, right? So the next episode is going to be the shadow self and relationship dynamics. So also another.
Hi, Mo.
So one of the things that we're going to be kind of including into these episodes at the end, we're going to skip it this week because we didn't really talk about it, but we kind of want to kind of provide you guys with like a ritual at the end of each episode that you can use, for your own purposes, surrounding kind of like the theme that we're kind of talking about, right? So what we would have gone over is kind of like a bonding ritual to align energies and intentions. But we didn't really have time to kind of like get into the details of how that would be done and discuss it with you guys. Next week we're going to be looking at a guided meditation for exploring and integrating the shadow self together as a unit. So that should be a good one. All right. So guys, that is going to be it. Thank you all very much for being here. And as I end always, it is hail thy fucking self. Always. And we'll see you guys in the next one next week. Bye-bye.